we're just going to create that profile, and let's create our EPGs. So we're going to have prod web. We're going to put it into the prod web bridge domain. We're going to have prod DB. It's going to go in its respective bridge domain. We're going to have dev web. Same thing. And we're going to have dev DB going into its own bridge domain. Okay, so the default gateways are already defined on the bridge domain. What we're going to want to do now is configure this for VMM as well, or deploy VMM association. So I'm just going to select it and deploy it. And again, this is just going to for our ACI virtual distributed switch in VMware. This is just pushing out port groups. Okay. Let me get prod web up and running and test it, make sure I have connectivity. Change the network adapter to our newly created application profile, prod web. Here we go. So we're on the 10.100.110. Let me just check something. All right, so this one's good. Let me just make sure I can ping my gateway. All right, I got connectivity. All right, let's create that layer 3 out to the ASA. But what we're also going to need to do is make sure we have. Let's check, make sure I did it already. We have a VR for the outside, but we didn't. I don't think we created a VR a bridge domain for the outside yet. No. So let me just create that bridge domain. I'm going to call it outside. It's going to be in the VRF, customer outside VRF. We're not going to do any unicast routing. We can have it enabled, but we're not going to be really doing anything with it. For some reason it's not taking. Maybe I didn't do it correctly. Oh, there you go. All right, so we got that bridge domain, and we're going to need to also create our application profile for outside. So we'll just call this firewall outside. And let's create an EPG. And that EPG is going to be called firewall edge. It's going to be in the outside bridge domain. And we're not going to do anything else to it other than configure the ASA and the customer connectivity into it. So let's see, what should we do first? Let's create our inside ASA layer 3 out first. So we're going to do a routed connection. We're going to do OSPF this time. So we're going to call this ASA cluster inside. And we're going to run OSPF. We're going to run area 0. Doesn't matter. Whatever your design allows, that's what you would do. We're going to put this into the customer 1 internal. It's going to be part of the internal VRF. And the routed connection, right, external routed domain is going to be the ASA. This was already pre-configured before when I did the cluster configuration so that we can actually configure layer 3 out to the ASA cluster. So that's that. And now let's create our node profile. Just going to keep the same, keep it default. We're going to need loopbacks. We're going to be doing routing over VPC because the ASA is VPC connected. So what were the loopbacks? So we're going to use 1.254 and 1.253 for each leaf switch. So for leaf switch 1, we're going to do 10.100.1.254. And for the other one, for leaf 2, we're going to do 10.100.1.253. OSPF profile. So we could do authentication, we could do BFD. I'm not going to waste my time with that right now. I just want to make sure that I have connectivity, but you could come in later and modify and optimize it all you want. So we're going to do an SVI because the ASA cluster is configured using trunks or using the port channels, and we're passing VLANs to it. So we're going to use our virtual port channel connection, and it's going to be for the cluster. We're going to use for our inside connection, I don't think we talked about VLANs. We go back here. Let's use VLAN 3398 for the inside. And let's use VLAN 3399 for the outside. That works. Alright, so we're going to use VLAN 3398 for our inside. Now we got to give that IP addressing. So we're going to use the 10.100.1.240 subnet. We're going to use 241 and 242 for the layer 3 out, and then we're going to use 243 for the ASA itself. So we got 10.100.1.241/29, and we got 10.100.1.242/29. And I like to hard code my MTU, especially for OSPF. And we're going to leave it as trunk because we're connecting into ASAs, as I mentioned before. So here's our VPC connection. That's going to be our path. We're using an SVI. We're going to hit OK here. Hit OK here. Next. Now we got to define our external EPG. So what we could do here, we could do the same thing. External EPG, let's just do EPG1. We could do a quad route, and we'll specify them as external routes connecting in. All right, I got to prep the actual ASA real quick. So this is the admin context. So I'm going to change to context system. And I want to see what I got here. So I got port channel 5 that is set up as my span cluster. So I'm going to create interface port channel 5, VLANs 33999. This is going to be for our outside. And we're going to create 3398. This is going to be for our inside. We're going to also configure you know what, we're going to be doing BGP with the outside. So we're going to need to configure BGP in the system context in order to use it for our other contexts. So we're going to be 65.101. Let me configure that. So router BGP 65.101. Yep, 101. So I don't think we need anything else. So this will allow us to use the BGP process for our other contexts. All right, so let's create that context. Let's call it customer 1. And let's allocate interface management is 0 so that we can actually manage it later. Let's also allocate interface port channel 5.3399. 3399, right? 3399, 3398, yep. And 3398. All right, so let's change to that context. What did I call it? Customer 1. All right, so here's my context. As you can see here, I got management 0, I got port channel. So let me get my script. Okay, I'm just going to get my script together. So 230, 32. Let's use 171 through 172, 30, 32, 172 for our cluster pool. To the 170. Okay. For cdi.demo. Let's create another username. Let's keep this the way it is, it's fine. All right. I think that should be enough to get us started. All right, looks good. We got a management IP. Okay, let me just get in here real quick and just create an access list. Permit all for now. I'm not troubleshooting something unknown. Okay. Let's configure our port channels that we allocated for inside and outside. So let's see if I could just drag this up here. All right. So we said we're going to use VLAN 3398 as the inside. So this was 5.3398. Outside. Security level's good. IP address 10.100.1.243. 248. And now let's create our port channel 5.3399. And this is, oops, I think I made a mistake here. I gotta go back to 98. This was actually my inside. Just make sure that security level. Okay. Now interface port channel 5.3399. This is going to be my outside. And I'm going to set the IP address of 10.100.1.238, and that's a /28. 240. Okay. Just make sure I can clean my interfaces. Okay. Oops. All right. And 100.1.241. Oh, what am I doing? I'm not paying attention. 10.100.1.241. Okay, I got connectivity. So I now have connectivity to each leaf switch. There you go. So as you remember, we configured this layer 3 outside for VLAN 3398, and we configured both leaf switches to be participating. So now we have that connectivity. So our port channel is operational. Now let's make sure that our outside port channel is operational as well. We're using VLAN 3399. So let's go into ACI real quick, and let's go to our firewall outside connection, our firewall edge connection, and let's add our physical domain, which is going to be our ASA cluster, and we're going to add our VPC. We're going to do an EPG extension here for VLAN 3399. We're going to leave it as a trunk. So now this ASA cluster, VLAN 3399, is bound to this firewall edge EPG. So what we also want to do is we want to add the customer MPLS router into the same EPG. So we need to create a fabric access policy for it. So let's go to access policies. Let's create a global policy, actually an AEP. We call it AEP customer MPLS, something like that. Let's add a, we're going to do a physical domain here, and we're going to call it 6500 MPLS physical domain. We'll change this later, but this is the only thing that comes to mind at this moment. And let's create a VLAN pool, because we're going to need to set this connection up with a VLAN. So let's do a VLAN pool MPLS customer MPLS 1 or 01. We're going to do a static. Let's put them on VLAN 4000. Looks good. Looks good. Next. Finish. So we created our physical domain here. Our 6500 MPLS physical domain. And that's tied to the AEP customer MPLS. It's going to be using VLAN 4000. All right, so let's create our policy groups and then profiles. So we're not going to do a VPC, we're just going to do a single connection. So we're going to create access port to MPLS port G. I think they're connecting on port G23. AEP was what we just created, so it's the AEP customer MPLS. All right, here we go. Looks good. And let's create our profile. We're going to create a leaf interface profile. Oh, lost my mouse. MPLS L3. Actually, this will be an L2 connection. Technically, it's a layer 3 connection, but we're going to treat it as a layer 2 connection. And we're connecting on port 3 for this one as well. But this guy's connecting on leaf switch 2. So port 3, there you go. So we're going to drop this guy into leaf 2. So if we double click on leaf 2, it's a mistake there, but anyway, click here, interface profile, and we're going to add our MPLS connection. We're going to submit that. No errors, everything looks good. Okay, let's go back to our tenant, our customer, and let's go back to our firewall edge outside connectivity. We already configured our physical domain for the ASA, so let's add physical domain for the MPLS connection. Here it is. And let's bind the port. So we're not using a port channel or VPC. We're connecting on leaf node 2 on port 3, and we're using VLAN 4000. But it's a layer 3 port on the actual MPLS router. So we're just going to set it up as an access port, and it's going to be untagged. Okay. So let's log back into our firewall, and we should have connectivity if everything was done correctly. So the customer is 10.101.225. There you go. So now we have connectivity to the customer. So what's happening here is that the ASA outside interface is on VLAN 3399 on port channel 5.3399. It has a connection into the firewall edge EPG, and because the MPLS router also connects into the firewall edge EPG on a different VLAN, who cares? They're able to have that connectivity because they're all on the same subnet. Alright, so let's set up routing with the customer. Actually, before that, I don't think we ran any OSPF. No. So let's set up OSPF for our internal connection. Let's see, what do we have? We have 10.100.1.238 in area 0. We have 10.100.1.240 subnet as well. We could do it this way. Doesn't matter. And that should set up an OSPF adjacency internally, because we deployed the, or did we deploy? I think we did. Yeah, the ASA inside. So we should be able to be routing already with the ASA. Let's check. Oh, there you go. So we now have adjacency with the ACI fabric through the firewall. All right, let's configure BGP now for that customer network, that customer router. So we're using 65.101. And our neighbor is 10.100.1.225, and he's running on AS 777. And what we need to do here is we need to redistribute our OSPF routes into BGP so that our customer CE on the bottom left there has connectivity. So why don't we do that? Why don't we redistribute OSPF1 match all internal, external 1, and external 2 routes. It should be enough, but you know what, we're going to also need to redistribute the BGP routes into OSPF. So let's go into OSPF and let's redistribute what are we, BGP 65101 subnets. That should be all. Alright, so we got BGP peering. Obviously we're getting BGP routes. We're getting the 94 and 95 networks, and we're running OSPF. So we now actually have a functional firewall that is peering OSPF, has an OSPF adjacency with the ACI fabric, as well as peering BGP with the MPLS router on the bottom left there. Okay, so let's make sure that we could establish connectivity from our production web to the MPLS. So let's see if we could ping the 94 network from the production web. So if I go back here into my machine, I know that I can ping the default gateway, but I believe I can't ping out yet because let's do 95. Yeah, I have no connectivity, right? So we need to set up connectivity. We need to set up a contract. So let's do that right now. Let's go into ACI real quick. Let's go to our application profile. Let's get our layer 3 connection here. So this is our ASA cluster inside that we created. This is our external EPG1. So let's just create a contract from prod web. So actually, let's flip these. ASA cluster 1, talking to prod web. Let's just create a contract out to prod web. Let's just keep the filter on all traffic just to make sure that we could test and troubleshoot this and submit it. Okay, so prod web is now associated, or actually has a connection, a contract to the external EPG1 that is coming on the layer 3 out to the ASA. But what we're also going to need to do is associate the bridge domain with the layer 3 out in this particular configuration. So let's go to the prod web bridge domain and make sure that we can advertise that network out. So we're going to go here and we're going to associate the cluster inside update. This should actually advertise the 10.100.1.1 subnet. Let me check the ASA here. Show route, and it is right here. No, that's right here. Sorry. So it's right here, 10.100.10. That is what we just advertised. As you see here, it wasn't here before. So we have the contract in place. Let's check the virtual machine. Oh, and look, we have connectivity. So before we weren't able to ping, and now we can ping. So by associating that bridge domain to the layer 3 out and creating that contract to that external EPG that is configured within that layer 3 out, we now have connectivity to the MPLS networks, you could call it. Okay, so what we want to do now is we want to set up layer 3 connectivity, or actually shared layer 3 out connectivity for internet, right? And we are we want to make sure that our prod web machine can connect to the 97 network, and right now it actually should not connect to it because it knows nothing about the tenant common networks. So if we go to prod web again here, and if I ping the 97979797 network, yeah, it's not going to respond. So what we're going to need to do here, I'm going to keep that in ping mode, we're going to need to create a shared layer 3 out route leak. Okay, so let's do that because it's coming from tenant common. We want to share that layer 3 connection and make sure that customer 1 can consume it. So let's do it. We have to go to tenant common, and we're going to have to create a contract. So let's do a shared L3 out, and this is going to be on the tenant level. So we're going to make it global. And for now, we're just going to do permit all. This could be fine-tuned later. Submit it, and I'm going to export that contract. And we're going to export the tenant 1, and we're going to export it to customer 1. Okay. Before I go into customer 1, well, actually, let's just go to customer 1 real quick. Let's go to the application profile, and we want to make sure that the prod web can access those external EPGs that are presented through the shared layer 3 out. So we're going to go into contracts, and we're going to add a consumed contract interface. We're going to do shared layer 3 out customer, which is what we just shared. Submit, and we actually have to go back to tenant common and add that contract to the shared layer 3 out as a provider, and that should automatically configure route leaking for us. So we're going to go here under our external EPG contracts, and we're going to add the tenant level shared layer 3 out contract. Okay. So let me see if that worked. Whoops. There you go. You have now connectivity from the customer tenant to the shared layer 3 out. Let's call it the internet. And if we quickly look at what kind of routes we're getting, so if we go to actually inventory under fabric, and we go to protocols, this takes a while. Okay, we look at our RIB, for example, for customer internal. These are all the routes that we're getting that are in our RIB, but let's look at BGP actually. So we got the default route from the tenant common layer, shared layer 3 out, as you see here, because we're looking at the customer 1 internal VRF. We see the 96 addresses from 96 and 97 address from the internet, you could call it, right? And we see the 94 and 95s from the ASA, pretty much. What you're not going to see here is connectivity to the DNS shared service, so we need to configure that real quick. We're going to need to create a similar contract in tenant common, Let's go to contract. Let's call it DNS services. This is going to be a global contract. Let's call it DNS services. Filter. Oh, I got DNS filters already. Okay, good. So this should have DNS on it. So I'm going to create that contract, and I'm also going to export it. And I'm going to export it as DNS. It's called shared services DNS. I'm going to export that contract to customer 1. And any EPG within customer 1 can actually consume it. So if we go in here and we go to the application network profile, we're playing around with prod web. We go to contracts here. We're going to add the consume contract interface because it's crossing VRF, so we're doing another route leak. We're going to consume the shared services DNS contract. If you want to see what that looks like, it looks like that. I can't ever get this nicely positioned, so it's all over the place all the time. Okay, so we have to go back to tenant common to the actual shared service for DNS and make this a provider of that contract. So we're going to go to the DNS EPG and we're going to provide that contract that we just shared out. So common DNS services, and that should establish connectivity. Let me make sure that I have ICMP enabled in that DNS contract. Where's my contracts? Here we go. Contracts, DNS services. Actually, let me look under filters. So DNS filters. So I have DNS, ICMP, and SSH. Okay, I mean, that's fine. So I know that I'll be able to ping. Let me open up my prod web here. And let me see if I can ping. What's that IP address? We're at DNS is 10.1.170. And there you go. Now I have shared service connectivity to DNS. Let me just check my routes here. Here it is, the 10.11. Okay, looks good. All right, so basically what we have done is we built out tenant common, we built out a customer 1 tenant, and this design for that customer can be replicated to more than one customer, obviously, right? What we can do is we can spin up virtual firewall instances or virtual contexts and allocate that virtual firewall context to each customer, okay? Now again, I showed you how to deploy ACI for, you know, a simple service provider network. But again, this can be tuned and changed up for, you know, for your enterprise network. Okay, it doesn't have to be an ISP provider. It could be your customer network. You can create different firewalls, different policies, different things for your internal applications. Okay. One of the cool things about this ACI is that, you know, you can utilize hardware firewalls and load balancers and other layer 4 through 7 services, integrate them with ACI, and make them part of your security policy. So in this design, again, we were leveraging the contracts, which are whitelists for east to west security, and we were leveraging the hardware firewall for our north-south security. Okay, so again, just to kind of sum it up, we are, for customer one, right, the prod web, prod database, dev web, dev database, the servers that are connecting into each respective EPG, whether they're coming in via bare, if they're a bare metal server or they're a virtual server, they're connecting in, and if they need to connect into the MPLS network, or if the customer wants to access those resources through the MPLS network, then they go through the ASA firewall. And if those devices need to get connectivity out to the internet, then they go through the shared layer 3 out that's presented here, and there's a route leak that's happening between VRFs. And if they need to access DNS services or backup services, so for example, if they want line rate data backup services and not going through a firewall, they have it, right? They just create that route leak, and they just can consume that that resource. Okay, one thing I forgot is I was using the show API inspector here, and what I do in this case is I'm going to filter for all the posts, and I now have my JSON code, okay, that I could configure with Postman or Ansible or other scripting tools. But I want to show you guys that in a different video series on how to actually take this configuration, put it in, for example, Postman, and be able to deploy this whole network in a matter of a minute or 2 minutes. Okay. So, this concludes our video series on the multi-tenant ISP design and implementation. I hope that this was educational. If your company is interested in ACI professional services, please contact us at cdillc.com. That's www.cdillc.com. And I want to thank you all for watching. And again, keep in mind that ACI is flexible and can be configured in different ways to match the requirements of your data center security. And again, it can easily integrate with orchestration tools like Clicker and others for that easy button to deploy network security for your data center applications. So thanks again.